run us through the mechanics of this trip. Where's the Prime Minister going to go and who's he going to meet with?
Well, 3 cities over about 6 days. So the Prime Minister's going to start in Shanghai, which is, of course, the teeming commercial metropolis, one of many in China, but the biggest one. And we get the sense, although this hasn't been confirmed publicly yet, that the Prime Minister's going to focus pretty quickly on business links between Australia and China. There are a lot of Australian businesses operating in and around Shanghai. So I think it's safe to assume that we're going to hear a bit about the way that we're working together in things like tourism, things like biomedicine, that sort of space. Then it's on to Beijing. Now, this is, of course, the political capital. And as you know, this is where we're going to meet, where the Prime Minister is going to have an opportunity to meet not just Xi Jinping, but also Qiang, who's the Chinese Premier. This is a bit of a curiosity in the system. Even though Anthony Albanese is the most powerful man, arguably, in Australia, in the Chinese system, his counterpart is actually Qiang rather than Xi Jinping, the president. So most of the substantive business will be done with the Premier rather than the man who holds the real power, namely Xi Jinping. And then after that, unsurprisingly, we're going to head to Chengdu, and Chengdu is famous for many things. On top of that list, of course, is the giant panda. Now, again, no confirmation yet from the Prime Minister's office, so this is me speculating, but I think it's likely that if the Prime Minister is going to go to Chengdu, then there's every chance that he may have a close encounter with a panda, particularly given we saw during the Premier's visit to Australia last year, all of that giant panda diplomacy, with China agreeing to send 2 new pandas to Adelaide Zoo.
Who doesn't love a bit of panda diplomacy? This is the second time Anthony Albanese is visiting China as Prime Minister. What do you think he wants to get out of this particular visit?
Look, the Prime Minister's always talking about jobs when it comes to China. He's used that word numerous times just over the last few days when he's asked, well, why are you taking this time to go to China? Obviously, China is a massive economic player globally, and it's our biggest export market by a huge margin. So if you take the next 3 largest export markets for Australia after China, add them all together, it's still less than the amount that we export to China. So it's a critical economic relationship. I think the Prime Minister's likely to focus on trying to build that relationship further. That's particularly important for us in terms of energy exports. We export, for example, a huge amount of iron ore and coal to China, but China's now really changing the structure of its economy as it decarbonises. So if it's going to move into things like green steel, that's got implications for Australia, and Australia will probably need to change the way that it exports and does business with China. So that will be near the top of his agenda. Of course, I think it's inevitable the Prime Minister will raise a whole lot of deep and serious problems that we have with China, whether that's the aggression we've seen from China with its circumnavigation of Australia by the Chinese Navy, its aggression in the South China Sea, Dr. Yang Henjun, the Australian writer who remains locked up in jail as his health ails, broader unease about China's strategic objectives in the Pacific, where Australia is really convinced it's searching for a military foothold. So I think he'll raise all of those things, but perhaps without a huge amount of optimism that anything we do or say is going to alter China's trajectory and its strategic objectives. I think he's going to be realistic about that. As for China, well, China's going to be pushing Albanese and the Prime Minister, he's going to be pushing the Prime Minister to try and take a softer line on things like Chinese investment. So, for example, we saw during the election, the Prime Minister promised that he'd effectively force a Chinese company to let go of Darwin Port because it's so strategically sensitive. I think China's going to push him on that, and the Prime Minister's going to politely rebuff them. And then, of course, there's the push that we've seen from China to try and find a way to cooperate more on some sensitive sectors like artificial intelligence. That's something Australia does not want to see. It wants to try as much as it can to try and keep the relationship in safer and less contentious areas. So continuing to send stuff to China rather than collaborating in spaces where there might be strategic implications.
I wanted to ask you just quickly, the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has been receiving some criticism that he's meeting with President Xi again before meeting with Donald Trump, the US president. How do you think this could potentially impact the trip? Is it something that Washington will be watching pretty closely?
Yeah, I think Washington will be watching this. Whether Donald Trump is or isn't is another question, but at least some people in the White House and in the State Department, they'll be tracking this fairly closely. I mean, inevitably, the optics here are a little bit fraught and tricky for the Prime Minister. It's not really his fault that he couldn't meet Donald Trump in in Canada on the sidelines of the G7, but it means that it has been an awful long time between drinks for a face-to-face meeting with the president, and he hasn't yet, as you say, sat down with Donald Trump. People say he's met 4 times with Xi Jinping. Well, that really just reflects the fact that Xi Jinping has been in office for all that time. And of course, Anthony Albanese and Donald Trump have only been in office for the same period for around 8 or 9 months or so. So it's not really a fair comparison. But that said, because there's this anxiety, I think, to some degree in Washington about the way Australia's tracking, there's suspicion in parts of the White House that Australia isn't sufficiently tough on China. And in the wake of some of the Prime Minister's recent speeches, including his one really emphasising the value of Australian independence within the US alliance, lionising John Curtin. Put all of that together, it means the Prime Minister is going to be conscious that the optics of this trip don't send an impression that he's too eager to get too close to China. It's a really difficult path for Australia and the Prime Minister to walk.
Stephen, thanks so much for your time and your analysis, and have a great time in China.
Thanks.